Hello and welcome to the Faculty Spotlight event series brought to you by the Johns Hopkins University Master of Liberal Arts and the Office of Advanced Academic Programs. Today's event features The Black Politics of Michael Jackson with Dr. Tristan Cabello. My name is Peter Huggins and I'm the event producer. Please note today's program will be recorded and uploaded to the AAP YouTube channel under the Master of Liberal Arts playlist. During the program, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A function, and we will answer as many questions as possible during the latter portion of the event. With that, I will turn over the event to the host of our program, Dr. Laura DeSisto.
Thank you, Peter, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Dr. Laura DeSisto, and I am the director of the Master of Liberal Arts program at Johns Hopkins University. Tonight is the fourth event of our Spring Faculty Spotlight series, which will run throughout the spring semester. In this series, we showcase the diversity of courses students can take in the program, as well as the research our faculty members are doing. As you know, the Master of Liberal Arts here at Hopkins is an interdisciplinary program. Students enroll in a wide range of courses that take an interdisciplinary approach to exploring topics, incorporating disciplines such as philosophy, history, music, literature, gender studies, political theory, and sociology, just to name a few. Tonight's speaker is Dr. Tristan Cabello, Associate Director of the MLA program. He received his PhD in US history from Northwestern University. He teaches a number of our core courses in the MLA program, among them critical theory, what is history, and interdisciplinary graduate research methods. He also teaches some electives, including the Black Politics of Michael Jackson. Tonight's presentation stems from the work that he covers in that course, which incidentally, we plan to offer this coming fall semester. Dr. Cabello will give a 30 to 35 minute presentation, and then we'll reserve time at the end for questions. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy tonight's presentation.
Thank you, everybody. The slides are working, right? Thank you, everybody. So thank you, Laura, so much for the introduction. Thank you, Peter. Thank you for having me in the speaker series. And what I want to do today is a little bit different from what we usually do in this series. Usually we have an academic talk about the research that our faculty is doing. And this time, what I want to do is showcase a course that we are going to give in the MLA program in the fall of 2022. So I'm going to give really a showcase of what this course is about, what the MLA stands for. And one of the very first questions that I usually ask when students enter the program, or when they take a course, or when they start doing new research, it's where does your interest come from? You know, why are you doing this? And invariably, most of the time, it has something to do with college years, with teenage years. Sometimes it goes all the way back to childhood. And I think it's my job as a professor, to help you identify the reasons why you want to do something academically. Because when we have identified this, it maximizes your chances for success, really. When you are driven by your passion, invariably you get a good grade and you do good research. And so if my students were asking me, why or where does this interest in Michael Jackson come from, I would have to go back all the way to when I was 6 years old or 7 years old. And so that's me as a little boy here. And obviously, as you can see, I grew up in the 80s. And I liked music very much at that time. I think I knew how to drop a needle on the turntable before I could actually talk. And so my parents decided to enroll me in courses, in music courses, in music classes. And that was at the time where it was easy. I grew up in Northeastern France, and that was at the time where it was very easy to register for those courses. You had classes, music classes, piano lessons in every city hall in France at the time. And so I'm 6 years old, and I show up with my mother to my very first piano lesson. And I think that here, what I see is, I think for the very first time, a big grand piano. I had never seen one. And the piano teacher was finishing a lesson, and that lesson was a singing lesson. And I can remember, to this day, what they were playing. And so I've plugged in my little piano here. Let me see if this is working. Yeah, I think it's working. And so it started a little bit jazzy like this. There were a couple of bars like this where the piano teacher was playing a jazzy tune, and then it got a little bit more bluesy. And the singer was singing this beautiful song that I had never heard before, right? But he was singing it very beautifully, powerfully, softly. I was very impressed. And towards the end, there was a lot of ad libs, and it sounded a little bit gospel-like. I think the piano stopped working all of a sudden. So it sounded a little bit more gospel towards the end. And that piano teacher asked me, why is it that you want to take piano lessons? And I told him, because I want to play that. And for the first couple of lessons, really, what we all did was just deconstruct, that type of music, the music that we had just listened to. And he helped me understand. Can you see my PowerPoint right now? And he helped me understand, really, well, what was behind that song, right? The combination of jazz music, blues, and also gospel. And so for a couple of sessions, all that we did during that during those lessons were simply to listen to records and try to understand, the different roots of a song. And that was really what got me into liking Michael Jackson, and also trying to understand where his inspiration came from. So the first record that I had was this one. It was, in case you hadn't understood, because I don't know if you guys could listen to the piano, could hear the piano, that was I'll Be There, the song I'll Be There by Michael Jackson. And so enough about me here. Although, again, in the program, I think the me is very important, right? We have students coming from different backgrounds. We want to understand why you are coming to the program, and what are your goals. And it's not really a one-size-fits-all program, right? I mean, we're trying really to understand why you're here. Let me get this straight. Okay, so one of the questions that I get often from my colleagues sometimes, and from friends, why studying Michael Jackson in a liberal arts program? After all, Michael Jackson may have been, the biggest pop star in the 80s, but he was just that, right? A pop star. And that is precisely the type of thinking that we are trying to deconstruct in the program, right? We are trying to deconstruct dominant narratives. Everything is worth studying, and there is always something to learn everywhere. And especially when you think about it, in the case of Michael Jackson, the Master of Liberal Arts is an interdisciplinary program. And when I say interdisciplinary, I really do mean it. I mean, interdisciplinary is really a buzzword, in higher ed, in academia right now. Everything is interdisciplinary, but when you look in the details, sometimes when the program says that they are interdisciplinary, it means that they just add 2 or 3 disciplines, usually literature, sociology, history. The program, the MLA program, is different. we really try to understand problems from different perspectives, with different voices, with different lenses, because we understand that in order to get to the truth, we need to attack a problem or an object from as many angles as we can. And so when we take the example of Michael Jackson, we're trying to study all aspects of Michael Jackson. And so Michael Jackson here you see in the right corner was a musician, an actor, a video artist, a television artist, a dancer, a poet, a lyricist, a performer, a theater person. He was also a businessman. He was also a philanthropist. He was a fashion artist. And in the end, we can also consider, and that's probably the most interesting and the most interesting part here, Michael Jackson as a cultural text. Michael Jackson was also just creating meaning as a person. And so in order to understand all of this, we need to use different disciplines. And so in the program, you do, in this course, we study a little bit of history, sociology, musicology, African-American studies, performance studies, gender studies, media studies, and so on and so forth. But we do not stop there, right? We also try to attack the problem or to debunk a problem or an object like Michael Jackson, through different lenses. And so we use critical race theory, structuralism, linguistics, Marxism, psychoanalysis, feminism, globalism, neoliberalism. All of this is mixed in the course. And that means also that we have to read the classics. And so in a course on Michael Jackson, you are going to read Roland Barthes, semiotics. You are going to read Lyotard, the postmodern condition. You are going to read Du Bois, the solo Black folks. You are going to read Fanon, Black Skin, White Masks, So you do get also to read some of the very classical critical theory text. And then what I love the most about the MLA program, of course, is the output and seeing what students, do with the work that they have accomplished in the classroom. And so for this course, for example, for Michael Jackson, students can do all the projects that they want to do, any project that they want to do. I leave them free to do whatever they want to do. So of course, a lot of students do end up writing an academic paper, but some write fiction, some do music, some do a digital humanities project. Some have even written a marketing brief, I had students in communications, for example. So there is a wide variety of projects here and a wide variety of text that you will encounter in a course like this one, as we do in all the courses that we offer in the MLA program. So let's talk about Michael for the rest of the talk here. The story, here what I'm going to do is really, I've selected a couple of albums, a couple of anecdotes, maybe not the one that you are the most familiar with, but it's of course absolutely impossible to summarize in 20 minutes the work that we do in 15 weeks, right? So those are just a couple of things that we learn in the course, right? The story, Michael Jackson's story, right, starts in Gary, Indiana in 1957. Those are the first two promotional pictures that we have of Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson is in the front here with the mic. And it's very interesting to get back to what life was like in Gary, Indiana. Those are a couple of pictures of the different venues where the Jacksons played before they were famous, right? The Royal Peacock Club here is in Atlanta, the Apollo's in New York, and the Regal Theater is in Chicago. And that's Gary here in the 60s. And the mayor of Gary was a very interesting person. The story at the beginning is that the Jackson Five were discovered by Diana Ross, who had attended a show in Gary, Indiana. That was a talent show in Gary, Indiana, that was organized by Richard Gordon, who was the mayor of Gary. And so the dominant narrative here about the Jackson Five is that they were very apolitical. And so for all of the 60s, 70s, even early 80s, when they were with Motown, they were releasing really bubblegum songs. I mean, that is at least, the dominant narrative. This is not exactly true when you look at the story in more details. Take, for example, the example of Richard Gordon here. Richard Gordon Hatcher was not a mayor like any other. He became the president of the NAACP in the 70s. He also was the director of J.C. Jackson's both campaigns in 1984 and 1988. He was one of the very first Black mayors elected in America, and he was very much a Black power activist throughout the 60s, very much against the Vietnam War. He wins the Democratic mayoral election in the 1960s against two white candidates, but he doesn't receive the support of the local Democratic Party. Actually, the party offers him $40 million so he withdraw his candidacy. And during the campaign, it's one of those very important campaigns in the history in the political history of America. The National Guard is in Gary because they fear that riots may happen. And so, even though here, what's very interesting to say is that Motown, when they discovered the Jackson Five, they actually connect them to the Black political history of the United States, and more importantly, to a Black power activist, at the time. And so here are a couple of examples also that the music of the Jackson Five were not as bubblegummy as the official narrative would tell you. For example, in the 70s, when Michael Jackson was asked what was his favorite movie, he would always say, The Great White Hope. The Great White Hope is actually the story of boxing legend Jack Johnson. They also released a very political record in 1972, Hallelujah Day, about the end of the Vietnam War. And when Stevie Wonder released his 45 RPM entitled You Haven't Done Nothing, it's a song against Nixon, he chooses the Jackson Five to be part of the background vocals. As you know, it's very important to also get to the Jackson Five started with Motown in 1969, and here again, it's very interesting to get back to the story of Motown. Motown was a record company that was in Detroit at the time. It was led by Berry Gordy. Detroit at the time was a motor town. It was the car town of America. And Berry Gordy is going to template exactly what they do in the car assembly, right? Everybody is going to have a different job in his record company. There's going to be a person who's going to do marketing, fashion, another one that's going to do dancing, another one that's going to do lyrics, another one that's going to do music. And so this is how they are going to do. This is how they're going to build music. Back in the days. And what's even more interesting about Motown is, of course, the musical eclecticism that was there, right? As I mentioned in the introduction, it was always a mix of gospel, of jazz, of blues, of bebop. Gordy was a jazz fan, but most of his lyricists and songwriters were former bebop musicians. And on the record, and on Motown also, they release gospel records. They actually even released sermons from Detroit preachers. Next up, 1979, after a couple of years with Motown and a couple of years on their own, Michael Jackson is finally releasing his very first solo album that's called Off the Wall, and it was released in 1979. Um, First up here, The Wiz. In the late 1970s, there's a lot of black exploitation movies that are being released in America, like Shaft, like Superfly. And so these movies presented an all black cast at the time. It was directed by black actors, black directors, and it often portrayed black characters as superheroes without stereotyping them. And so in 1978, they decide to do an all black version of The Wizard of Oz, right? And Michael Jackson plays in that version. There's Diana Ross as Dorothy. There's Richard Pryor. It's produced by Motown. Dorothy, instead of living in Kansas, lives in Harlem. And the movie is a failure. It doesn't do well at the box office. But all the critics are completely unanimous about the fact that Michael Jackson gave a stellar performance. At the time, he's not a superstar. That's 1978. That's before his first record. But the way he sings, the way he acts, the way he dances, that's when people actually discovered that he could do all of this and on the screen, right? The way he uses his body, he plays the scarecrow, is outstanding. And so all the songs against that he sings in that movie are actually good example of what he became later. That is, they are deeply influenced by the African-American musical tradition, but also, so there's a lot of blues, a lot of jazz, a lot of gospel, a lot of funk, but he merges them into more mainstream, let's say, form of music. Like here, it's very much a Broadway composition, right? And more importantly here, what we do in the course is that we get to talk a lot about one of the most famous musicians in the 20th century, Quincy Jones. Quincy Jones writes the music of The Wiz, and then, of course, for most of the 80s, he works with Michael Jackson, mainly as a producer, right? And so the good thing here is that we have so much available by Quincy Jones in his interviews, but he has also written a ton of books where he talks about the way he envisions music. And so Jones was trained as a jazzman, but he studied also classical music in Paris. He became an orchestra leader. He was trained, and then he became a producer. And one of the core philosophy of his producing of his music was that at the center, at the core, at the basis of all music in America is actually African music, right? In many of his writings, he says that no other music is actually connected as much as African music to nature. And he often makes a parallel between African music and the African-American tradition of jazz, bebop, funk, and later on hip hop by saying that instead of being connected to nature, that music is very much connected to the urban environment where people live and can not only interprets the sounds that they found in those environments, but also embellish them, right? And so he's also somebody who, like Michael or like Jackson, is going to try to decategorize music. And so this is exactly what you hear in that album. If you remember, one of the first song of the very first song of the album is Don't Stop Till You Get Enough. And Don't Stop Till You Get Enough is really just that, right? A mix of funk, disco, jazz. You have the strings, the Motown strings too. So it's really a mix of that. Let's move on to Thriller here. And so there's really a lot to say about Thriller. Of course, those are the heydays of Michael Jackson's career. This is when he releases Beat It, Billie Jean, Thriller, Human Nature, Wanna Be Starting Something, and all of that. And so this is really a powerful time for him. I mean, between 1982 and 1985, everybody in America had a copy of Thriller. The record actually sold something like 60 million copies in less than 3 years. There was a time in 1984 where there were 1 million copies sold, 1 million copies sold every day of Thriller. And so instead of focusing on the music here, I just want to focus on one political aspect. Jackson goes to visit Ronald Reagan in 1984. I have a video here, but we don't have time to watch it entirely. But Ronald Reagan is in 1984 running for re-election. And Michael Jackson has given a song, Beat It, to an anti-drunk driving campaign. And so Ronald Reagan invites him to the White House. And there's a very stark contrast here, right? Between that older white man who's also very masculine, who's bigger, who has a deep voice, and Michael Jackson, who's exactly the contrary, you know. And literally, when he gives Reagan speaks for 5-6 minutes, and Jackson only says, you know, "Thank you, Mr. Reagan. Thank you, Nancy," in that very high pitched voice, you know, that I cannot imitate really. And so there's a lot of bad press here because Michael Jackson is very much criticized for doing this. Many people in Black communities, in the Black community, do not like Reagan, and so in many of the articles that you read at the time, Michael Jackson is being criticized for taking advantage of this, or for not knowing that he's being taken advantage of. Of course, Ronald Reagan is running for re-election. Michael Jackson is the biggest pop star. He has to reach to Black communities, to young people. And so that was very much a publicity move. But little did we know that Michael Jackson actually didn't care much about Reagan at the time. He was much more friends with Jesse Jackson. Jesse Jackson in 1984 runs also a campaign. He's trying to be the Democratic candidate, you know, so he's running for the primary, and he's very much running on a platform that resembles, you know, what Bernie Sanders, for example, has done in recent years. So very left wing, very he doesn't use the word socialist, but this is what it looks like and it sounds like. And Michael is actually the Jacksons are actually helping him. And what they do, for example, they're on tour at that time, and they have voting registration booth on every show that they give in 1984. And the story says that they actually registered 3 million new voters just on that tour. For example, when the tour opens in Kansas City, we have statistics, you know, that before the tour comes to Kansas City, there's only a fraction of the youth population of Kansas City that's registered to vote for the primary, and it doubles, triples. It's really an impressive number, and so that's also the type of things that we try to do here to deconstruct the difference between, again, as I've been saying since the beginning, the dominant narrative and what truly happened. Let's move on to the next record that Michael Jackson releases in 1987. That record is entitled Bad. And so everybody, and so that's the record that has The Way You Make Me Feel, Smooth Criminal, Man in the Mirror. So all the songs that were very also popular at the time, it has like 6 or 7 number ones. Everybody remembers, here what we do for Bad, we do a little bit of a video analysis. what everybody remembers. So the bad video, right? Jackson is part of a gang. They dance. They're in the subway station. The choreography is really good. It's like um, uh, that station in Brooklyn. And but what people have forgotten about that video is that it's actually a much longer short film. It's a film that was directed by Martin Scorsese. And it's a film about a kid that comes back from college to Harlem and is being bullied by his former friends. Um, and the inspiration behind this is actually the story uh, of Edmund Perry. Edmund Perry was a young kid who lived in Harlem, and he was studying at the Exeter Academy in Connecticut, and he had received a full fellowship to study at Stanford. Yet that summer he was about to depart for Stanford. He got killed by a policeman, and so that story was a book. It was a movie, and it was also part of. It was actually the inspiration for the Bad video, and so this also helps us, kind of understand, the philanthropist side of Michael Jackson, and really who did he give money to? And when you look, closer into what Jackson has done during his career, he has done a lot. He has given a lot of money to African American charities, right? For example, when it comes to education, he gave all the proceeds of his 2 concerts at the Madison Square Garden in 1988 to the United Negro College Fund, and he funded approximately 5,000 scholarships that year. That's also here a good opportunity, and I cannot go into too many details because we are going to run out of time, about the notion of double consciousness that's explained by Du Bois in The Soul of Black Folks. Double consciousness, very quickly, is defined as the internal conflict experienced by subordinated or colonized group in an oppressive society. And Du Bois coins that term in 1903 for the first time. And so that's a term, that's a framework here that, of course, applies precisely to that video, but also that's actually a concept that students have been using, for other type of works, because it does apply to a lot of dominated identities that we have, whether you're LGBT, whether you're first generation, you always have, to navigate between what people expect from you and what you are portraying into the world, right? And so it's usually really a haha moment for many of the students. I wanted to play a little video, but I think I'm talking too long, so let's skip this little video and let's skip to the next record here. In 1992, Michael Jackson releases Dangerous here, and Dangerous is an occasion for us to study visual art, right? There's so much to say about this beautiful cover art. And one thing, for example, it features Shirley Temple, and Michael Jackson had a very ambivalent relationship to Shirley Temple, because Shirley Temple was one of the only, a child star that he could relate to, but also Shirley Temple was one of the last actresses in America who used blackface. That gives us also an opportunity to debunk, what Michael Jackson, the work of Michael Jackson as a lyricist, because most of the time, his songs are are really analyzed as simple poetry, but there's often, a lot of double meanings here. For example, a song like "Black or White" that we all know is usually portrayed as, or usually analyzed as, a song about unity, friendship, interracial unity, when it's really a song about or against racial violence. I mean, for example, if you see here, he says, "I ain't scared of no shits, no sheets," referring to the KKK. There's an encounter at the beginning of the song about a guy asking him if a white girl is with him. So there's a lot to debunk here. There's a lot to analyze, and that's what we do in the record, in the course. Let me talk 2 or 3 minutes here about the last record, a song that was a history, and so history is that record that has They Don't Care About Us, Scream, Earth Song, You're Not Alone. And that record has a song that's probably the most political song that Michael Jackson has ever written. It's called They Don't Care About Us, and there are 2 videos for that song. This is the first time that Michael Jackson talks about systemic racism in America. And the first time he actually uses the opposition, us versus them. And so we use that song to read or to learn the Black nationalistic lens. And so it's this ideology here that white supremacy is based on the dehumanization of people of color, and therefore the fact that white supremacy cannot solve systemic inequalities in America. And so this is really, a period of his life where he is very close to the ideology of the Nation of Islam, for example, even though he doesn't convert. But that gives us an opportunity here in the course to read bell hooks, to read Paul Gilroy, for example, about the concept of hybridation, and also to talk about Michelle Wallace, who is a specialist of Black feminism. And Michelle Wallace says something very important here. She says that contemporary African-American culture as a narrative based on the exclusion of its member from dominant culture is also claiming the limitation of equality, liberty, and justice. And so to her, this is exactly what Michael Jackson does in all of his performances. And to me, that's a very good occasion to talk about postmodernism and about the hybridation of identities, the multiplicity of identities. And so we use this opportunity to talk about postmodernism. And students usually also find that they can use that postmodern lens to analyze so much of what's going on in their lives, right? And so much of what, of course, they see in popular culture. Very quickly, They Don't Care About Us has actually 2 videos. There's one video that plays in the favelas that gives very much a sense of unity here, of global unity throughout the Black diaspora. And there's a second one that's probably that's a little bit more violent, where Jackson is in a prison, and he's the leader of the rebellion that's happening in that prison. And so, with that being said, we still do have 5 minutes for questions. So just to summarize here, what I want to say is that this is really an example of what the MLA program is about. That is to say, interdisciplinary debunking dominant narratives by using, again, the classic text of critical theory, of philosophy, to understand what the world is about. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Tristan, so much for sharing this rich tour through the course. It's clear that it is an ambitious class that covers a lot of ground. And I wanted, as people are collecting their thoughts and framing their questions, and for those of you who are watching, please know we'll save the questions that you submit. So if we run out of time, I'll be sure to share them with Dr. Cabello, and he can follow up by email with you if we're not able to get to them before this session concludes. But as people are collecting their thoughts, I wanted to ask you a little bit more of a sensitive question. I understand and appreciate what you were talking about in terms of this being a course that analyzes Michael Jackson and his career and his contribution to culture on multiple levels, and it examines him as a cultural text. But I would be remiss not to ask the question that in recent years, especially Michael Jackson as a person is controversial, and there are very heated discussions and debates about how much he should remain as a part of the conversation, whether or not we should continue to listen to his music, and what to do, or how do we reconcile some of our understanding or our increasing knowledge about who he was and what happened with some of these other aspects of his contributions to especially late 20th century culture, especially within the United States. How do you respond to that? Is that covered in the class, or what do you do with that?
Yeah, it is covered in the class, and so that's a very important question. That's a question that students and myself are struggling with. When we first gave actually this course, when we first offered this course 2 years ago, that was right around the time where that documentary on HBO had been released, Leaving Neverland, about the two children, the two person who were accusing Michael Jackson of child molestation. And so, of course, all of this, is covered in the course. There's many scandals, around Michael Jackson, right? There used to be, the fact that early on in the 1980s, he was said to sleep in an oxygen chamber, that he had, chimps living with him. Then, there was a lot of discussion, of course, about the plastic surgery, the fact that his skin, the color of his skin dramatically changed. Then, of course, there was the child molestation accusation, And so what I'm doing with this course, of course, there's no way for us to know what really happened, right? So Michael Jackson was cleared from all accusations, but many people still believe that he was actually not innocent. Michael Jackson claimed that he had a skin discoloration medical condition called vitiligo, but a lot of people are still not convinced. He also claimed that he didn't have that much plastic surgery, but that doesn't matter. The question really that I want students to ask here is, why did it matter so much to us? And also, why did we care so much, right? Because why couldn't this dude, when it comes to, I don't know, plastic surgery, for example, do whatever he wanted, So like, he's absolutely free to do whatever he wanted. And so when it comes also to the child molestation, that's also a very important topic here, because I'm often asked, child molestation. I mean, it's one of the most disgusting, ugliest crime that you can think of, and yet, what's so fascinating, about Michael Jackson here is that you still hear his music on the radio. You still have parents who are playing their music. You still have parents who are seeing, their children impersonating Michael Jackson, and they don't care, And so my vision here again is why did it matter so much? Did we truly believe, what happened? And also, was his contribution to the musical industry or to the history of arts in America so powerful that, imagine if we remove Michael Jackson of the conversation, it's like there's a big hole, and it's just, how do you explain music videos? How do you explain big shows? How do you explain big pop stars? How do you explain that kind of hybridation? How do you explain MTV? And so that's really the tension here. And so, of course, students, can believe whatever they want to believe. I mean, it's absolutely not a problem here. And everybody's opinion is welcome, but still, my job, as an instructor, is to show how complex and multi-layered those questions were.
That's wonderful. And I realize we've come to the end of our time. I just want to share that some of the questions that are coming in are asking you to expand, and so you can follow up with them later, to expand on exactly those points, those tensions that exist that we can see embodied, literally embodied within Jackson in terms of his changing skin tone and his understanding of himself and his role as a representative of aspects of the Black and the African American community, and how he navigated his understanding of himself and his connection to that community, and also how that extended into his advocacy and the work that he did for various charities and his contributions to the civil rights movement. So I'm seeing a number of different questions get populated through the Q&A and through the chat, but that's the cluster of questions. And I would imagine that that's a through line that you're interrogating and investigating throughout the course of the semester.
Yeah, of course, if I can say, one last word here, I mean, that option, because here I see a question, for example, about his obsession with changing his appearance as a rejection of his Blackness, and here again, it's very much a dominant discourse. I mean, a lot of people do think that, even though Michael Jackson, said exactly the contrary. He's always said that he was proud of being Black, and so my question here is always, how were we actually, as an audience, projecting onto him our own fears, our own discussion, our own conversations, about race, and those are really triggering very interesting conversations on the discussion board, because there's no right or wrong answer, right? I mean, it's just to try to understand, how a popular discourse is being created is fascinating, but the beauty of it is that really there's no right or wrong here.
That's wonderful. And for those of you who are intrigued by this, again, there'll be more opportunities for, especially for current students in the MLA program, to engage in this conversation in depth with Dr. Cabello in the fall when he offers this class. Thank you. I know it's incredibly challenging to take a 15-week course and try to distill it within 35 minutes.
And of course, I had way too much to talk about, but I mean,
and as we were sharing before tonight's talk, we would have loved to hear you play the piano a bit more, and I'm assuming that happens also in the course of the semester. Yeah. And so again, thank you for providing us with this lens into this rich and multi-layered topic. And again, those of you who submitted questions who didn't feel as though it was fully answered, he'll follow up with you about that. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us this evening. As we already mentioned, this presentation has been recorded, and it will be available on the MLA program's playlist on YouTube within the next few weeks. So you can go back and listen to it and think about it quite a bit more. And I also wanted to plug, and hopefully Peter will put the slide up soon, our next talk thank you, Peter, the Faculty Spotlight series will be from MLA faculty member, Dr. Jason Ridler. And he will be presenting on cherry pickers, turning history into advertising for fun, profit, and malice. And that'll be coming up, I believe it is next week. And you can find more information about that on our Eventbrite page. So again, thank you everyone for joining us this evening. We greatly appreciate your engagement with the Faculty Spotlight series. And we look forward to seeing you at the next presentation. Have a good evening.